Okay, we're going to be finishing this section right now, okay? So we're going to be going into exactly what we have been talking for the past class, okay? We're talking about how do you transform yourself from GATT to WTO. Then you talk about what is a preferential trade agreement, what it really means in terms of the relationship to people. Now, one of the things that we have to do in the next 2 classes or 3 classes is look at this not only from the perspective of government, but also of business, how business looks at these combinations. And what I want to do is I'm going to be showing you a video where there will be a discussion about what is the benefits or non-benefits. And one of the things that one sees frequently is as one discussion takes place, if a person is from the business community, they will be pretty much in support of RTAs, PTAs, etc. Because from the perspective of a company, it makes a lot of sense. It opens the economy for them and allows them to make investments, allows them to really become better in terms of their business firm. So there is a different perspective, whether you look at the RTA from a business perspective or whether you look at it from a governmental perspective or whether you look at it from a theoretician's perspective, okay? 2 of the articles that you are supposed to be reading look at the problems of RTAs, FTAs, and the new composition of trade, not from the perspective of what happens to a business company in itself, but what happens to the overall trade creation, trade diversion in the economy. And so the analysis of economies mostly tend to be what is really the situation between what you are creating in these RTAs and what you are destroying in those RTAs. Okay? That's the perspective of what you will call the welfare position of economists. Because what we are looking at as an economist is really what happens in any country in terms of the trade creation, the trade diversion. And the combination of both is what tells you whether it is going to be a good thing or a bad thing, because it creates more welfare for society. But from the perspective of a government and from the perspective of a business community, really what is of interest to them is, can I do better business or can I do worse business as I create these structures? Last time we were talking about discrimination. If I'm a country that is going to be discriminated at because you are reaching an agreement between 2 countries, then I'm not going to be very happy, okay? Because what's going to happen to me is the creation of a trade agreement, a regional trade agreement, a zone of free trade, where I do not belong, then it makes me as a country less competitive in that market. From the perspective of the business community, the same will be true, because what they will be looking at is, if all of a sudden I have products that I have been exporting to that market, and that market closes, not because I'm being more inefficient, but simply because there is a trade agreement between that country and another country, a country where I don't have a business, where I'm not located, then I'm going to be facing a new constraint, okay? Be it because they will increase trade tariffs, which as we saw last class, the clause of WTO does not allow. So that should not be the problem if I'm a business. What will be really the problem is, whereas before other people whom was affected by the tariff just the same as I was, will now be able to bring things into the economy without the payment of that tariff. And in itself, that makes a difference. Let me put you an example of this. When we were discussing, trade negotiations with Central America, and there was a lot of discussion in Mexico, in business companies, one of the things that we kept telling our people was, look, if you really now take advantage of the agreements that we are making with Central America, you will be able to export a lot of tomato sauce to those countries. And the reason is very simple. Tomato sauce is going to be free of tariffs once we finish the negotiation with the Central American countries. And so any tomato sauce that's coming from outside will remain or will retain the tariff, import tariff, and automatically you will be suffering a reduction vis-a-vis these competitors in that market of 20% in your price. Okay? So if you're a tomato sauce producer in Mexico, one of the advantages you're going to have is now you can bring your tomato sauce product into the Central America market and compete with tomato sauce producers from other parts of the world with a difference of 20% just because of the tariff. As a business, it gives you a great advantage, okay? And so automatically, if you're a business person, you're going to be better off if you were still working, if you were before working on that market. Now, that's the key question for a business company. At the same time, for a business company, the danger is if I am competitive in that market because I am a company that can bring the product to that market without paying tariffs, and that makes the difference between the price I can bring the product into the market and the price other people can bring the product into that market, and the difference is the tariff. One of the problems I'm going to be facing in the future is when that government decides to reach an agreement with another government that will bring tariffs down, I'm going to lose my edge. I'm going to lose my competitiveness. So think of it this way, okay? What we're talking is, this is one country, this is the other country. Because we're with proximity, we decided to make a regional trade agreement. That creates in itself a free trade zone, yeah? I am company A, and I'm company B. In the initial stage, let's suppose that I'm company A, and I only have this market, which is my market. And this is company B, and only have this market, which is my market. There is a common market when I go and I work in both countries. But if I'm company A, and I'm exporting to country B, what's going to happen is, because there are tariffs to trade, the cost of my product is cost of production plus tariff. Okay? So let's assume that the cost of production is 10 and the tariff is 20% on the price. So I want to sell at 10, I'm going to have to add 2. When I bring my product to country B, I have to sell it at 12. Producer, company B in country B, has cost of production of 11, tariff 0. Okay? Because it's in the country, so it's part of that country. Doesn't have an import tariff. This producer is competitive thanks to the tariff. Okay? Once I make an agreement, free trade zone, no tariffs, then what happens is producer from country B, who before had the market for itself, now is in trouble. Okay? Because now nothing happened here, and according to the rule, you are trying to promote trade. Okay? Not to divert. That's the only way that you can get this exclusion from the general rule of WTO is if 2 things happen. The first one is you are going to promote trade, which is happening because now people are going to be exporting from A to B. And the second thing is, but the tariffs that you had before for other countries, you do not modify. Okay? So we're assuming that for many products they had 20% tariff. Both conditions will be fulfilled in this case. Once I reach an agreement with you, what I'm not going to do, country B, I am not going to increase tariffs to other countries to 25. I'm simply going to leave a 20% tariff as it was before. Okay? So I'm fulfilling both conditions. 1, I'm promoting trade. 2, I'm not increasing tariffs on the rest of the world. Once I did that, a lot of things start happening. Okay? The first thing that happens is producer in country B of the same product that country A has a company producing at a lower cost is going to lose market. Yeah? Because what happens is this is more expensive than this. Without the tariff, this product is going to get at 10. So automatically, whereas before supply of that product in country B was by producer in country B, company B. As of tomorrow, supply of that demand for that product is not going to be country B, company B. It's going to be company A sending to country B. Okay? When that happens, this guy loses, this guy wins. I am promoting trade. Because what happens is now it's coming from the other side, so I'm promoting trade. If I don't increase the tariff on the rest of the world, I am not creating conditions for diversion, okay, of trade. And therefore, this is a better off situation than it was before. The rule of WTO accepts that exception. So I can do it. But if I'm a company working originally in country A, I am winning market. Because the reason why I was less competitive in country B was because of the tariff, not because I wasn't competitive, okay? The winners in this transaction are going to be consumers. Consumers are going to be getting the product now, not at 11, but at 10. Okay? So consumers in country A already have the price of 10. Consumers in country B now are going to have the price at 10. Consumers are winning. Everybody's winning in this transaction except company B. Because now company B is going to be excluded from the market. Okay? That part clear? So I fulfill all the conditions WTO. I am company A, company B, and I start seeing the effects of the regional trade. From the macro perspective, trade is happening, is better off. I didn't increase tariffs with the rest of the world, therefore I'm not damaging anybody else. But from the perspective of the microeconomics of a company, the company now is facing a different reality. And the different reality is, I am not competitive anymore. This company is going to go out of the market. If this company goes out of the market, it's going to create unemployment in the country. Yeah? Because these were people who were satisfying demands in that country. And it's going to create employment in this other country. Because now this company is able to hire more people because it has a bigger and larger market than it used to have before. So the first lesson for a company is you better be competitive. You better be competitive at the international level. Don't be competitive because you have protection. Because if you are competitive because you have protection and that protection disappears, you're going to be out of the market. What do you think is going to be the reaction, therefore? The reaction is going to be this group of people against the regional trade agreement, this group of people for regional trade agreement. And so what you have is the same effect as any discussion on trade, okay? But very localized at this point. Now, as you create unemployment, you have groups that will then oppose the trade agreement. As you get benefits, you have people who will support. This is the distribution of gains and losses in the country, okay? Now, the problem is, if I'm a consumer, I am going to be getting a benefit. So all consumers are going to be better off than they were before, including these guys who produced the good, but they had to buy it at 11 anyway in the market, okay? So everybody, as a consumer, is better off. But not everybody is better off once the whole process takes place. Because the workers in this industry and the owners of that industry are losers. The workers in the same industry and the owners of the companies in the same industry in the other country are winners. And so the distribution of gains and losses is going to be perceived differently depending on what happens. You gain employment, you lose employment. Therefore, you make more investment, you make less investment. This is going to be worse off, but it's a group, yeah. That's why what is very important when you get into these things is what happened to what is called the interest groups, okay? Because in the politics of trade agreements, interest groups are very important. Is that clear to all of you? Okay. It's politics. Yeah, sure. But it's politics because I'm going to be losing my job, I'm going to be losing my business, I'm going to be losing. And therefore, there is going to be a reaction. Okay, stage 2 of this thing. As I do that, this company, who before could not export there, is exporting. But let's suppose that there is country C. And country C is another country in the other side of the ocean. Okay? So this is country C, and it has company C. Company C produces the same product. Company C produces the same products at the cost of $10.50. Okay? And is subject to the same tariff now of 20%. So before, this guy could have been competitive because he could have been tried to make the product into this place. Well, he won't be competitive, okay? So the key question of whatever happens here is, if this guy is able to bring the cost of production by some innovation or whatever to 9, then you will see that he's trying to get into the market. And whereas before he could get into the market by reducing this 9, 20%, that will be how much? That will be 10.80. He was able to get into this market. Okay? If he keeps doing this, he's able to get into the market anyway. If, however, he were a little bit more expensive, and the only way that he could put the product would be 11.10 to say something, okay? 10.80, he's going to be out of the market anyway. So the key question for companies outside is whether they can bring the product at, let's say, 9.50. This country is called China, okay, most of the time. And so what's going to happen to China is he won't be able to get into this unless it's part of an agreement. Because now he's been excluded of the market, and he's going to be excluded not because they reach an agreement. He's excluded because of this tariff. WTO rules prevail. I didn't do anything. I didn't increase tariffs against third countries outside this agreement, so I can do it. What I have, though, is a free trade agreement, okay? Everything seems to be doing okay. All of a sudden, country B says, but you know, why should I continue to have only a free trade agreement with country A? I'm going to do it with country C. Since I am not a customs union, I am not, okay, I can do it. Because in a free trade agreement, we have internal free trade, but we don't have a common tariff. In a customs union, I have a common tariff. In a free trade agreement, I don't. As it happens, we both used to have 20%, and therefore there was no big deal. The only thing that happened is this 20% disappeared for trade between the two countries. It remained. But it remained not because we had a customs union. It remained because that was the number that we had before. All of a sudden I decide and I say, I want to make a different agreement with China. And so I'm going to enter into a trade agreement with China where I will reduce for Chinese products my tariffs from 20 to 0. When I do that, China may be able to get into the market very quickly because they can bring it in at $9, okay? And so when they can bring it at $9, the problem I'm going to be facing now is they will get into the market of C. let me just finish this. I get into the market of C. I'm sorry, B. And then country A, which was already getting that market, the company, is going to say all of a sudden, wait, what happened? All of a sudden, I'm not competitive anymore in this market. Because now I have a competitor called China that walks into that market at $9, whereas I can only produce it at 11 or at 10, okay? Once you do that, something that is called erosion of trade happens, okay? Which is the advantage that I had in that market vis-a-vis third parties depended on the 20% tariff. 20% tariff is not a common external tariff, and because it's not a set, this country can take a unilateral decision to reduce that tariff, okay? As this country does that, is not going against the rule of WTO, because the rule says promotes trade and you do not change tariffs on third countries. He's not changing tariffs with this because it's zero anyway. The only thing he did is included this other country to zero. In other words, I can take unilateral decisions even if I am in an RTA. And when I take those unilateral decisions, the effect of those unilateral decisions is that trade inter the two countries may all of a sudden start changing again. Okay? And so trade agreements are okay. But even though it has rules, it has disciplines, it has definitions of how we're going to be doing trade, because it is not a customs union, allow the country to get into several trade agreements, which then create a very complicated situation for business firms. It also creates a complicated situation for people who want to review and police, if you wish, all these processes, because all of a sudden you have all these rules going on between different countries. You had a question?
Why country C didn't pay any tariff to country B or country B?
Because in my first agreement, I agreed to that, yeah?
Okay.
In my second agreement, I am excluding this one because, in fact, it's not a common agreement between the two countries and this country. So I took a decision unilaterally, which is, for my people, for my purposes, to have a free trade agreement with China is convenient. But country A didn't say that, okay? And as a matter of fact, I didn't ask country A. All I did is I then made another trade agreement, bilateral, with country C. In so doing, my market now is a market where companies from country C, companies from country A, and companies from country B are going to be competing without any restrictions, okay? Which is not true for country A. So if I am bringing a product from China into country B, and then I want to sell it in country A is going to say no, because the agreement is only for things that are produced in your country, not for things that are brought from outside your country. Okay, that is going to give you, and we're going to see all this now, another problem which then is called ROO, which is called the rules of origin. Yes, Amel.
I didn't get very good erosion trade. Could you repeat?
Because I was a company exporting, I had trade. My competitiveness depended on this tariff. This country is going to keep the tariff vis-a-vis China. This country is not going to do that anymore. Once I do that, then company A exporting to company B is going to lose competitiveness. Not because of anything that happened in terms of its production process and everything else, but because there is an erosion in the competitiveness, if you wish, in the advantage that was given to that company by the fact that they could put the product at 0 tariff, whereas the rest of the world had to put it at 20. Once I do that, I erode this advantage for you. Because what's going to happen is, it's like I'm chipping away things, okay? That's erosion. What I'm doing is, you were here and then all of a sudden you start feeling that something is coming down, 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 down. It erodes. And the reason why it's eroding is because I took a decision unilaterally. And so your trade from A to B is going to start diminishing. On the other hand, trade from C to B is going to start increasing. So think about yourselves as a company, because that's what you have to think, because that's what you are going to be doing, okay? What you're going to be doing is you're going to be sitting with companies and you're going to be saying, wait a minute, let me see, what are the advantages of all these negotiations that are taking place between countries? Because as country A works with country B and then with country C, I am seeing now different negotiations taking place which change completely what are the advantages provided not by my competitiveness, but in fact by all these trade agreements which change who is more competitive vis-a-vis another in each one of these markets. Okay? And the problem is, but country A didn't get into the agreement with China. So whatever advantages country B is getting from that agreement, country A is not getting. The incentive then from country A will be, well, then I make an agreement with China. And this is what you see now in many countries, okay? What you see is, I have an RTA, and then all of a sudden, 2 countries from those start making another RTA, and more countries get into that, and slowly you are moving in the direction of overall trade agreement. So there are people who say that this RTA process, or PTA process, all these trade agreement processes, are benefiting world trade, world integration of trade. And there are those who say, no, because what it creates is a lot of distortions in the overall process. And so it's very complicated to know who wins and who loses. But what it's really making is life very difficult for many people, because it's creating a complexity in the whole process which you didn't have before. And there are erosion of trade. Now, whether you believe this or not, this happened in our country already. The textile industry in Mexico used to be quite inefficient. But at the same time it was inefficient, it was more efficient than the textile industry in the United States. And there was something called, and we will see it as part of the course, the multi-fiber agreement. The multi-fiber agreement was an agreement, MFA, was an agreement, you have to learn all this, MFA, BBB, whatever, okay? MFA was an agreement whereby during a period of years, the fiber industry, the textile industry agreed to establish quotas. Not only tariffs, quotas. You couldn't import, you couldn't export more than a certain amount. China was affected by that for many years. So what happened was, when Mexico gets into a free trade agreement with the United States, 2 things are simultaneous. On the one hand, there's a strong devaluation of the Mexican currency. And so our products were absolutely competitive because of that devaluation in dollar terms, in a market in which, in addition, you didn't have to pay tariffs. The combination was very good for an industry in particular, textile. So textiles from Mexico invaded the American market. And what happened is, everybody believed that they were tigers, okay? That they were very competitive. But they were competitive because of this artificial combination of the devaluation, which made very, very cheap products in dollar terms in the American market, and the fact that we were opening the market. And in addition, you had quotas for products coming from other countries, China included. When the multi-fiber agreement disappears, ends, China gets into the American market, the Americans decide to bring their tariffs to zero in the imports between China and the United States in textiles. And then the Mexican textile industry loses against China in the United States market. This is a very interesting thing you should look at because you have to learn these things as you work in companies. If you really believe that you're competitive for reasons other than being competitive, internally, productivity, innovation, things of that sort, you may have some advantages in markets when trade agreements favor you in those markets. But if those advantages go away, they will erode your capacity and you will lose those markets. You will go bankrupt, which is exactly what happened to the industry in Mexico. The textile industry in Mexico is a fascinating case of study because it's everybody believing that they were so good and all of a sudden discovering that they were not. And when they discovered they were not, they began making all kinds of noises. And the noises were, this is not fair competition from China, they are using child labor, they are doing this, whatever, except I need to look at myself and see how I become lean and powerful. But they didn't do it because they were asking for protection. So in the industry, in this industry in Mexico, for a while, for a long while, there was a lot of protection to imports of textile products into Mexico. Okay? We negotiated with China. I was the head of the negotiating team with China, the accession of China into WTO. We were the last country to accept China into WTO. And in that negotiation, we demanded from them that they gave us 15 years protection in Mexico vis-a-vis textile products, okay? One of the rules of accession is the country who is acceding into the new kid in the block has not only to respect the rules, but in addition has to make individual agreements so that everybody will accept its entering into WTO. And what we demanded was protection for steel, for textiles, etc., for a long period of time. We finally got a negotiating of about 7 to 8 years, and that was the protection that we gave extra to our textile industry. To no avail for many of them, except those who became very competitive. Mexico has, by the way, a very strong textile industry, completely different in terms of its structure to the one that we had 20 years ago. Very competitive companies, still, but very few. And they are competitive because they mechanize themselves. And by becoming more and more technically mechanized, they have less and less labor. And so, yes, it's a very important industry, but it does not employ the number of people used to employ 20 years back. Yes?
Maybe the agreement between U.S. and Mexico happened.
The agreement with Mexico and the United States entered into vigor in 1994. When did we have the big devaluation of our peso? So you look at Mexico and you say, okay, this is President Salinas de Gortari. He's the one who makes the agreement with NAFTA. Yeah? But then you have dates of when you enter into force and everything else. And so the period of our friend Salinas is 88-94. Yeah? They reach finally an agreement, and it's going to start really working 94-95. So the first year of operation of NAFTA is 95. As the agreement enters into operation, we have the big devaluation of 94-95. Okay? As we have the big devaluation of 94-95, what you have is a tremendous crisis in Mexico. The drop of product and everything is because of this mistake. That's a different story, but I mean, it's a mistake in terms of the exchange rate manipulation. That's what it was during all 1994. President Salinas didn't want to be the one devaluing the peso. And because he didn't want to do that, he made at the end of his period a series of mistakes that it took about 10, 15 years for us to repay, okay? I mean, if you think what's happening in Europe is bad, it was terrible here. And you were little kids, so you don't remember. But as the process went through, this huge devaluation happens between December, January, February. December 94, January, February 95. When you have this huge devaluation, in dollar terms, your products are very competitive. But if you add to that we eliminated the tariffs in that particular year, all of a sudden, you had tremendous competitiveness provided to you by a devaluation and the fact that you had no tariff for your product. In what market? The biggest market. And an economy that was growing in very strong terms. So all of a sudden, we invaded the American market with our textiles. All the textile industry, basically, of the United States disappeared within 3 years, okay? So what happened to our textile industry later on happened to them. So the lesson is, be careful of all these things, because if you're not really truly competitive in an international world, tariffs may be going to zero because of all these kind of agreements. Therefore, it would be better to have a multilateral agreement, in which I know that whatever happens is for everybody, and then that will not change. But that's not how the world is moving, okay? So as we move at this thing, what we are seeing is exactly that point. What we're seeing are all these concepts that we just saw last class, okay? And as you move into that, you start seeing what happened. What happened was, all of a sudden, these kind of things started happening all over the place. Look at the jump, and look at how these are happening. And also look at something which is quite interesting. All of these are what is called inactive. That is, basically there is practically no trade. Why? Because there are countries which have nothing to offer. So last class we were discussing whether a country who has nothing to offer really is benefited by preferential trade agreement. And we said, yes, that's the reason why they do it, because they don't have anything to offer. So I have to open the door freely to those countries. The problem is, if I do that, I'm beginning to get against the rule of WTO. And so slowly, if I do that, a country like Mexico comes and says, wait a minute, you are discriminating against me because you are allowing products from those countries to get into your country with zero tariff, and you're not allowing me to get into that. And so I'm going to be complaining at WTO about that. And then, we had a discussion last time. People say, well, but they were nice people. They are poor people. Come on, let's help them. Well, wait a minute. I also have poor people, so I don't care. Just because they are in Africa, it's not my problem, okay? And you have to be egotistic in a sense, because if you're not that way, then you're not going to be fighting for your own people. So that's really what happens. But look at what happened here. All these trade agreements. This was 2009, and it was like that, and it continued to happen. Right now, the United States of America and the European Union just began conversations on a free trade agreement between the two. Okay? So if you're a company in Mexico right now, and you realize that there is a process of negotiating between the United States and the European Union for a free trade agreement, you have to wonder, if I'm exporting to the United States, whether what I'm exporting to the United States is because I'm very competitive or because I have an advantage vis-a-vis products from Europe which are entering with a tariff. You have to analyze all those things when you're in business, okay?
The diminish in RTAs in the year 2007 is because they stopped doing them because they were inactive?
Yeah. This is the cumulative active RTAs. This line, okay? You can negotiate many things and then nothing happens. So really what we have, looking at that type of thing, is we have an explosion of bilateral treaties. Okay? Because what happened during the whole 90s was all this approximation between countries. And say, okay, I make one-on-one deals. And you had exactly this kind of situation. We get, and then you get, and then I get, and we start doing bilateral treaties. During the whole 90s, that was the whole process. Then we had this combination, North-South, deep RTAs. Okay, United States, Mexico, north-south. Even though you may think that south is north-south. Basically what this means is developed nations with underdeveloped or emerging nations doing trade agreements, okay? No longer developed with developed, but now United States with Mexico, European Union with this, that with that, and you started to do these kind of agreements. And so those were stronger, they were deeper agreements. They included more things, goods, services, things that they were not considered before. And then you have US NAFTA-like type of agreements, Japan, where it has economic programs, European Association, where it has association agreements. And so what we're moving into slowly is this kind of term. It's called the Economic Partnership Agreement. When I get into an economic partnership agreement, I include many more things. I'm talking investment, I'm talking movement of people, I'm talking government procurement, which is a very important rule for many companies. If you're a company like Boeing Corporation or you're a company like Embraer, whatever, you want to make sure that whatever purchase of planes is made by the government of the United States or the government of Brazil, or you are going to be participant in that. Because many countries exclude government purchases from agreements. But now we're saying, no, you have to also put them on the market. And then you have competition policy and bilateral cooperation, etc. So when you look at all these things, what you are looking at is we are moving from free trade agreements, where it was only trade in goods and services, more and more into economic partnership agreements, where we have all these other items in addition to trade in goods and services included. And this is the way out to the problem that we were facing if I want to help unilaterally. Because PTAs are going to be disappearing, okay? But I'm going to transform them into economic partnership agreement. Once I do that, I'm getting out of WTO, and WTO is staying behind the time, so they have to really mobilize. That was the last part of the course is, what should WTO be doing in order to change? And look at this, I mean, it used to be one-on-one, one country, bilateral. But now your RTAs are including 16 partners or more. So what's happening more and more is RTAs are not necessarily happening one country. What's happening is a group of countries with one country, two groups of countries among themselves. So the average number of partners in any RTA is increasing from 2 all the way, to about 15. This is another complexity that's happening in trade. If I'm going to be negotiating, just imagine what happened here. I'm Mercosur, and I'm the European Union. So when I'm negotiating 4 with 27. If I reach an agreement, the number of partners of that agreement is 31. Okay? But if I'm making a trade agreement between Mexico and Japan, one-on-one, 2 partners, no more. That's how we started, basically, okay? But what happened is all of a sudden we found out that it made sense, if we are doing this, to do this as a block. Everything that you see is changes that are creating more complexity in the trade world. If you are a company, you need good people like yourselves to be part of that company, to start analyzing and providing strategic points, where to make business, how to make business, what to take care of, how to be concerned about things, everything else. You have a question? Yeah?
Yeah. So we could say that the tequila crisis, it was affected by the situation that we lost competitiveness because of the trade agreements.
No, the tequila crisis was really a situation where my internal problems and the level of debt that I acquired as a country created a terrible situation for the financial world, because what happens, I couldn't pay. And when I couldn't pay, given the size of my debt, therefore the size of the non-performing actives in the portfolio of many banks, commercial banks, they will go bankrupt, okay? So I was bankrupt anyway, but they will go bankrupt because I was not paying. As I did that, you start having an impact all over the world. Because if I am Citibank, I am not a local bank, I am a world bank. And as I am this kind of world bank, the impact of this amount of money reduces credit not only in one country, reduces credit all over the place. As I do that, I enter into crisis. If I enter into crisis, because I have a lot of deals with all the banks, the other banks start entering into crisis also. Because banking and the financial process is a very different animal than the kind of trade that we're talking. It's a fascinating trade, okay? But it's very different. Things move very fast. Most of the banks are leveraged, okay? The capital they have as a proportion of the total lending portfolio is small. Used to be a time where it was 5%, 8%, 12% now. You're trying to make it more and more solid. But then the question is, what kind of capital do you have? Do you have real capital, or is capital that you invented through several things? And so a bank can disappear very quickly. Okay? You have a run on the bank. If you and I have deposits in Citibank, and all of a sudden listen that the bank is in trouble because Mexico didn't pay to it, what would you do what I would do? So you're going, you take your money. But remember, banks will have, let's say this is a nice bank, 12% capital as a proportion of the total portfolio. Okay? So the problem is, this is the money that they have. And they use that money to go into lending. So people deposit on them. You have your T account, you have the deposits, and you have the loans, yeah? Or if you wish the other way, which I think. This is really what you owe to people. And they deposit and deposit and deposit and deposit with you, and you lend and you lend and you lend and you lend. Now, you and I go and we deposit $10. And we go and we say, I want them face value. I want to take my money as quickly as I can, fully liquid. But the guys are lending money. They may be lending these $10 of yours and mine at 90 days. So I go and get my money, but they will not get their money back until 90 days from now. They're going to be having a liquidity problem. As they go into a liquidity problem, they don't have the capital to do that. They will have to get loans from someplace so they can make up for those payments while they get the money. If they don't do it correctly, this is going to become an insolvency problem. They're going to be insolvent very quickly. The Kila crisis created that effect, okay? And it was just a sample of what came later on.
Why did it only spread to Latin America and to US, to Europe? Because we are talking about world banks also.
Let's suppose you and he are friends. Are you?
Yeah.
Good friends? Yeah. Okay. So, you and I are very good friends. The assumption I'm making is you should be pretty much equal in many ways of behaving. Otherwise you wouldn't be friends. Not that good friends. Yeah? So you go and you hit another guy just because he told you whatever. The immediate reaction is, you're a bad guy. Yeah? But the next immediate reaction is, he too. Because he's your friend. If he's your friend, he must behave like you. And then he comes and says, no, really, I'm really different. Says, if you were different, you wouldn't hang out with this guy. Okay? That's called the neighborhood effect. So what happens is, this is Latin America. Yeah, but it's Mexico. No, Mexico. Do they speak Spanish in Mexico? Yeah. Do they speak Spanish in Argentina? Yeah. Do they speak Spanish in Brazil? No, but Portuguese is close to Spanish. It's like a baby talks Spanish. So, they're all the same. Okay, really, really. And so you have this withdrawal because of that effect. That's why it's called contagion. Okay, you have a contagion effect because people immediately say, no, they must be equal. They must have the same disease. Move back. And that's what happened during the tequila crisis. As you did that, you start having more trouble with banks that lend to all these countries. So if your portfolio of lending as an international bank was really in these countries, you started having terrible situations. Okay? But that's a different story. This is not trade like this. Okay, so we have these combinations. But then look at this. Isn't this nice? This is what Bhagwati calls the spaghetti ball effect. Okay? Because what you can see now is slowly all those combinations are beginning to look like a spaghetti ball. If I put all the ones, this is a publication that came out from the Asian Development Bank, okay? And they only have the Asia agreements in here. And as you can see, you have one combination of countries, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Brunei, Singapore, Vietnam, in one agreement. Asian, okay? But then they also have an agreement where they include Japan, Korea, China. And then they have another agreement where they have Australia and New Zealand, but they are not part of this other agreement. And then they have the United States, which is part of several agreements, but not all of them. And Peru and Chile are involved here, but not in some others. And as you start looking at this, you can see the connections. When you draw something like this, one of the best economists in trade, which is Jagdish Bhagwati, called it the spaghetti effect. Because it's like you see a spaghetti ball, okay? You're going to eat spaghetti if you look at this. Look at this. This begins to look like a spaghetti. If I put all of them, it really looks like a spaghetti ball. This is the complexity, okay? And look at the complexity. This is now Asian countries with other 6. And it's called CPM. And so I have to look at the other 6. And then this is Asian plus 8. This is APEC with FTA. And these are all the agreements that are taking place in Asia. Each and every one of these could be different. And therefore, each and every one could complicate my life. If I'm a business and I want to participate, I have to understand that things that I may get in this red central point, which is the Asian Free Agreement, okay? This is the Asian Free Trade Agreement. May not be the same things I'm getting if I go into Japan, Korea, and China. Because of this complexity, because the number of countries that are participating, more and more I'm getting into a very difficult situation with trade. Okay? It will be much simpler. We have the same rules for everyone. That's a multilateral trade agreement. These are plurilateral, and that's the difference between plurilateral and multilateral trade agreements. A plurilateral can exclude. A multilateral does not exclude. This is a photo. Behind this, there are legal documents. If you are working in a company, you have to understand all those legal documents to see what kind of business can I do here and here and here, how that affects me. Okay, if you are someone who is supervising that those agreements, those legal agreements take place, it's going to be very complicated. Okay? So that's part of the problem. And this is another combination, okay? It's all the different agreements that are already signed and all the ones here under negotiation. And here is the one that we are discussing right now, the TPP participants. Now Mexico is included and Canada is also included, okay? So what you keep seeing more and more is what Bhagwati calls the spaghetti effect. For Bhagwati, this is wrong because he's a trade economist. For many people who are practitioners, as it's called, believe this is the only way that you can move freeing trade forward. As a company, you are in trouble. The variety of RTAs, the following are the types of items that are negotiated between partners to reach an economic partnership agreement.
I wanted to ask if, besides the complexity of doing trade, if there are any like advantages or disadvantages while doing like the different kind of trade. Like if I do multilateral trade or bilateral trade.
The advantage of a multilateral is no matter where we are, we all get the same treatment. And therefore the rules are very clear. Okay? If you as a country decide in a multilateral agreement that you're going to give Montserrat's 0 tariff, you have to give it to all of us. You cannot exclude us. Okay? So once you reach that, whether I'm a company in my country, her country, his country, or your country, doesn't matter. Okay? We will get the same treatment. That makes life easy. That makes life very, very easy to see what I can do as a company. But if you sit with Montserrat and you reach an agreement, and then you sit with me and we reach a different agreement, then the problem is there are certain things that will be okay for a company if it's placed in my country, exporting to your country, different from what happens to her country, and vice versa. And so a company then is thinking, okay, because of this agreement I can take these advantages with you. Because of an agreement with her, we're doing a different agreement. You're Paola, yeah? Lydia. Lydia, okay. And as we move in this concept, it's very complicated, okay? Because in the end, as a company, you're looking at the world if you really want to see that as your market, but it's not easy to see the world when you can have all these kind of sub-agreements. So if you want to make sure that information technology is included, well, yeah, if I did it with Singapore, but not if I did it with Mexico. So I'm not going to get, if I'm in information technology, I'm not getting the same benefits here, than here, than here, okay? And nothing tells me that these agreements, are going to be the same anyway. All I know from the rule of WTO is whatever the beginning was, they cannot alter that for the rest of us. Whatever the beginning was, but in the end, I have no idea what happened in these negotiations. And then, who's going to be enforcing that? Because there are now so many things in here. So I'm a company, and I come and I say, well, hey, they didn't respect my agreement. Okay, go and complain. Whom with? Whoever is managing this agreement. But you WTO, no, because I just accepted it, but I'm not the one supervising it. So if you're going to go to the rule of law and the court, in NAFTA is the NAFTA group, okay? Hey, but they didn't protect my interests, and well, yeah, go and complain with the NAFTA group. So you would rather have one single tribunal. Doesn't happen that way, okay? Yeah.
So with multilateral agreements, the world would move towards the production of what they do best, right?
And that was the whole idea of GATT. That was in the origins, the whole idea of WTO. In the process, this is what we're discussing right now. From GATT to WTO, something happened. And what happened was RTAs, PTAs, economic partnership agreements, preferential trade agreements. I do it because I like you so. Okay? As you move in this direction, it's complicating life for everybody. But there are many who say that you have to be pragmatic. Nothing would have happened in multilateral anyway, because you wouldn't have been interested in giving me the same advantage that you gave Montserrat, because I didn't have anything to give you in return. And so people in your side, particularly business people, what's called the side rooms. When you go into a negotiation process, you bring with you business people. They do not enter into the official negotiation process because that's only between officials of the countries, but I always bring them as my advisors. So on the side room, all these business people are sitting, and before I agree with the other government, I go and I ask them, is this okay? Why? Because they are my constituency, and if I don't do that, I'm going to be having trouble in my country. So in the end, I do listen to my business people, to the labor unions, and when they bring me these recommendations, they come and they say, don't do that, because if you give multilateral, then people from Honduras, to say a thing in Mexico, okay? People from Honduras will be, and Honduras is not the United States. So don't do that. Oh, okay, well, I was trying to get this from the United States. Go bilateral. Because if you don't do that, then you will have to give it to everybody, and then we're going to have competition from countries such as Honduras and this and that. So there is this theory that if I had tried to do everything in multilateral, I wouldn't have been able to move 1 inch. So I went bilateral, regional trade agreements, plurilateral. As I do that, this country reaches this, and then he finds in his own interest to make an agreement also. And so I'm moving trade. This is one theory. Okay? The other one is that's really creating a lot of distortions and is creating more problems than solutions. And you have these two groups fighting, okay? If you read the articles that I gave you, this is the discussion there. It's really good, it's really bad. It's a way of protectionism. It's not really opening trade, but rather protecting now blocks. And as these blocks protect themselves, they are really excluding other countries. And that's bad for the world. But look at all the things that we are now negotiating, okay?
So before all these things were negotiated?
They were not negotiated before. We all started with two very simple things: quotas, tariffs. And then as we began getting into this as well, let's add this, let's add that, let's add the other thing. And so it's becoming more and more complex. Because in the end, you want to make sure that there are labor rules. Because if I allow child labor, then in my country I allow child labor. No, that's unfair. You're going to say the things, well, this is unjust, you don't do that to children. Yeah, well, give me a break. There's a lot of children working in the world, okay? But if I officially accept that, then I reduce the cost of production because I'm using child labor, which you and I think is wrong. So in our country, we have legislation saying child labor is not allowed because it's bad for society, okay? But then you go to Bangladesh, you go to Myanmar, whatever country you like. Maybe they do it, and they're not penalized. So what you do is say, well, if we reach an agreement, one of the conditions of the agreement is no child labor. And then you're going to say, because it's bad for society and this and that, fine, whatever. The reality is, because if I don't do it in my country and I have the legal structure that penalizes me if I do it, and you don't, then you're going to use child labor, and I'm going to lose in the competition. But if I have a clause saying that this is not right, I can come back and say they are using child labor. And even if they are not penalized in their country, because the agreement between you and I says that no child labor is allowed, wherever I can demonstrate that is being used child labor, that product will not get into my country. Okay? That's the whole point.
What do you think would happen between the possible free trade agreement between the United States and the European Union? Like, what are the discussions about?
They really want to make a free trade area for the whole region. And that would be quite interesting. Because in the end, think about this, okay? We already have one with the European Union. We have one with the United States. So the interesting for us will be, okay, if you're going to be doing that, how can we harmonize our two agreements with this agreement so that we basically have one single agreement? Okay. Now, maybe it's not convenient for us Because maybe the United States was willing to give us more concessions that they will give the Europeans. Maybe the Europeans gave us more concessions that they were willing to give the Americans. If that's going to be the case, we're still winning because we do have already these two agreements. But if that agreement all of a sudden is free trade, free everything, free mobility, free whatever, then I'm in trouble. Okay? What will happen? That depends on the negotiations. Because I can tell you the first one that is going to be opposed of many concessions is going to be the labor union in the United States. And the second one is going to be the labor unions in the European Union. And when you get into that argument, who knows what can happen. But there will be a lot of liberalization because we're basically having right now liberal trade, okay? Very free between the two countries, two regions. But you know, they will have to discuss all this. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that something is good for us.
What do you think about custom union? Like, is it wise to have a custom union?
I'll tell you what's going to happen in the next class. So let me finish this. RTAs complicate trade with the world, okay? Because what they do is, all of this is an overlapping membership. In the end, I belong to several things. And so I have an overlapping membership. I am a member of a trade agreement with the European Union and with the United States and Canada, and with Central America, and with Japan, and with Mercosur, and with this, and with that. And as I do that, I have overlapping relationships because Japan also has a free trade agreement with the United States. And so, are they the same? No, they are not the same. And because I do that, I have overlapping membership. And as I'm including the scope, as you saw in all that long list, for many things which are not regulated multilaterally, you are now increasing the risk of inconsistencies in the rules between different treaties. And in the end, you have a problem with the multilateral framework. Okay? This is regulatory confusion, this is distortion of regional markets, and this is severe implementation problems. Because I cannot control everything. So, what kind of problems? Rules of origin. Okay? This guy exports to my country, and then I re-export to the other one. No. Because that good was not produced in your country. Okay, so let's make an agreement. What should be the rule of origin? It has to have at least 80% content of inputs from the region. Okay, that means I put my shop here, I import parts from here, and I can import up to 20% from there. Yeah. Product get 20% from here, does it? Someone has to check that it's truly 80% 20. Rules of origin have become a very complicated process because I can distort trade by applying different concepts in rules of origin. But the other problem is, as I accumulate, as I add more and more provisions in RTAs, the problem I'm facing is, yeah, I can do this from this country, but I cannot do that from that country. So yes, if I take 10% from this, it will be accepted. But if that 10% comes from this other country where I do have other free trade, doesn't count for this kind of product in that country in particular. So the idea of everybody is, look, if you're going to be doing that, go for what is called diagonal rather than bilateral accumulation, okay? Meaning we have several groups and we put a diagonal across the board, 20% from other countries, 80% from this. Because if you are putting 10 from here, 20 from there, 10 from there, who's going to be checking on that, okay?
And what happened with companies like Boeing, they have a lot of stuff in a lot of countries. What happened with the rule of origin?
That's a problem, okay? Except if there is no problem. Because if all of a sudden I say, I really don't care where you bring things from, just give me the plane, then that's it, okay? But how many airplane companies are in the world? Pretty much 5 to 7, okay? Small ones here and there. So that's not really a big deal. But how many textile companies are there in the world? Okay, so you start getting all these problems because of that. So people say, look, make it a broad-based diagonal rather than bilateral accumulation. It cannot have more than 40% from other countries. That's it. Which countries? Don't worry, man. 40%. Because if I have to say, if it comes from China, 10. If it comes from Japan, 30. If it comes from, I'm never going to finish, okay? And it makes life very complicated for who wants to produce the good. So the whole point of the rules of accumulation is to create trouble, not to solve trouble, okay? Because what I do is I want to protect my industry. These are the new ways of protecting industry. Another one is, much of the trade has zero MFN. Because what happens is we agree on things, but we don't give zero to the rest of the world. We said, you and I 0, the rest of the world 20. This 20 was the concession we made in a multilateral agreement. So the rest of the world has some tariff. Whereas, okay, so more and more as I enter into these treatments, what I'm going to be doing is I have less and less products with an FNF tariff of 0, okay? And you can see that in all these agreements. This is the European Free Trade Agreement, the European 15, the European 27, the Asian, the Central American, the Southern Africa, NAFTA, Southern Africa in the east side, etc. And as you see all these agreements, which are the ones that we're going to be seeing in class, okay? You see how they don't have 0 tariff for the rest of the world. 0 tariff for the ones who are in the agreement, but not for the rest of the world. Because what I did is, when I went into the agreement, I made an agreement with you, and we left the rest with the tariffs they had before. So more and more I'm finding this situation, okay? And that's how everything is happening. So summarizing in this, and then I'm going to tell you what's going to happen next class. Free trade area, trade within the group is duty-free, but members set their own tariffs on imports from non-members. Okay? Customs union, members apply a common external tariff. Preferential trade agreement, unilateral trade preference given by a group of countries, normally from developed to developing nations, like the African Caribbean program. Generalized system of preferences, programs by developed countries granting preferential tariffs to imports from developing countries in general. Okay? Free rider. You know what a free rider is. One who mounts into the car and doesn't put any effort. Okay? Casual term to infer that a country which does not make any trade concessions profits nonetheless from tariff cuts and concessions made by other countries in negotiations under the most favored nation principle. This is one of the biggest deterrents of the multilateral. People say, why should I give that guy? He doesn't give anything to anyone. But if I give something to her, in automatic I have to give it to him too. So I'd rather work with a bilateral or plurilateral. And the rules of origin are the laws, regulations, and administrative procedures which determine the product's country of origin. Okay? But this is the problem. The decision by the customs authority on origin can determine whether a shipment falls within a quota limitation, qualifies for a tariff preference, or is affected by an anti-dumping duty. And they vary from country to country. And then we go into integration. Oh, that's different. If I am going to be integrating myself, then I can integrate in many ways, but what I would love to do is a political union. So I start with the preferential trade area. Do I have free trade among members? No. Do I have a common commercial policy? No. Do I have free factor mobility? No. Do I have common monetary and fiscal policies? No. Do I have one government? No. Oh, okay. Then what it is? I'm just giving preferences to people. Free trade area. Free trade, yes. Common commercial policy, no. Free factor mobility, no. Common monetary and fiscal policies, no. One government, no. Customs union. Free trade, yes. Common commercial policy, yes. Free factor mobility, no, no, no. Common market. All of these are higher forms of integration. Yes, 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 no, no. Okay? Economic union. European Union as economic union. Free trade, yes. Common commercial policy, yes. Free factor mobility, yes. This is the biggest problem for the European Union right now, that in some countries they have common monetary but not common fiscal policies. Okay? And they have a problem. They made a monetary union, but they don't make monetary and fiscal union. And they don't have one government. And of course, the dream of the European Union, I become a country, which is dying right here. Okay? Because they didn't think through what was going to happen. What is the integration paradigms? The typical paradigm is linear integration, what you saw right there. Step by step by step by step by step. Okay? The whole idea would be to reach a regional economic community and then go into a political union. And that's the paradigm. The paradigm is I go straight. I start with trade of goods, I go into mobility of people, I go into, and slowly, slowly, slowly I integrate myself. Many countries jump into this before thinking it carefully. So they start creating a regional economic community. Mercosur, customs union, this, that, in countries which have not the same characteristics. And so the problem is, as I move into deep integration, this is the problem, the perceived loss of sovereignty that such a deep integration creates. Because I'm not going to be able to decide migration policy, I'm not going to be able to decide trade policy, I'm not going to be able to decide monetary policy, I'm not going to be able to decide political policy, defense, this, that. So the problem is, as you move in that, you need some policy space debate to associate and see how do you convince people that you are going to be better off in the end. Everybody says, yes, migration will be great with Mexico and the United States. Well, yeah, try convincing the people who lost their jobs because of the migration. But we'll see these things next class, okay? So, next class, I'm going to be sending you a message because there is be a debate on how shall we transform NAFTA. And since I have, Paola is not here, yeah? No. Okay, Jocelyn, okay, we're going to be having you as one of the discussants, okay? Jose didn't come, so he's going to be the other one. Andres, you're going to be the other one. And Ana Maria, okay? I'm going to be sending you a message, and you will know what. You have to read the documents, but the key question that we're going to be having as a debate is, and it's going to be a debate sitting here in front of the other ones, okay? It's going to be a debate on two things. One is, should Mexico move into full integration with the United States and Canada? And how will be the places? And the other debate, there are going to be two different debates, is going to be, should Mexico go into Mercosur? So what you have to analyze, the ones who are here and listen to this, what is the difference between NAFTA and Mercosur? Because that will tell you what you should be defending in your debate. Okay? So you have to analyze what are both of them.
Can we ask, or is it going to be?
Oh yeah, no, it's going to be a debate, and then it's going to be open to the public. Okay?